What are the top 5 issues in this 2.7 liter EcoBoost engine? Well, as a heavy duty mechanic, I'll tell you what I think. Welcome back to the channel, guys. We are back with this 2.7 liter EcoBoost twin turbocharged engine. Last time I had this truck on the channel, I spoke pretty highly about this engine. It is impressive what Ford has done with this engine. Oh God, he's a Ford lover. No engine is perfect, and although I think this 2.7 liter engine is pretty reliable, it does have some issues that I think people should be aware of. So that's what we're doing today. I'll give you my top 5 issues, some general advice on how to potentially avoid those issues, as well as some things that just generally would concern me or things that I don't like about this 2.7 liter EcoBoost engine. So jumping right into it, the number one catastrophic engine issue with these 2.7 liter EcoBoosts, which has gained some recent traction actually, is the intake valves fracturing and dropping into the engine, causing complete engine failure. At first, this was thought to be a very rare issue that was mainly happening with the Broncos, the 2.7 liters in the Bronco. But in 2022, the National Highway Safety Administration launched a full investigation into this 2.7 liter. Fast forward to October of 2023, and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has determined that over 700,000 of these 2.7 liter EcoBoost engines are or could be potentially involved in the intake valve issues, including the 2021 and 2022 F-150s. Now, the alleged issue involves the alloy that is used on these intake valves. It's called Silchrome Light. And apparently, if there's an over temperature situation during the machining of this alloy, these lifters can become very hard and brittle and potentially fracture. Now, before everyone starts to panic who owns a 2021 or 2022 F-150, typically these intake valve fractures happen at very low mileage, generally before 10,000 miles. So if you have mileage higher than that, you are most likely going to be just fine. Secondly, if your truck was built after October of 2021, the issue has been resolved for those newer trucks built after that date. Getting into some less scary issues, a very common issue with these 2.7 EcoBoosts is leaking oil pan gaskets. Now, myself as a mechanic, this does not really worry me too much. However, as an owner, I can completely understand how frustrating and annoying it would be to have oil constantly dripping on your driveway. The first gen 2.7 EcoBoost 2015 to 2017 model years were pretty horrible for this. Allegedly, it has to do with the plastic oil pan Ford used. During a lot of heat cycles, the plastic would expand and then contract, and apparently that's what led to a lot of these oil pan gaskets leaking. And despite Ford replacing both your oil pan and oil pan gaskets, these things would still leak. I heard a story of a gentleman who had that done 3 times. And his oil pan was still leaking. Good news is the second gen engines, the 2018 plus 2.7 EcoBoost engines, did have their oil pans completely redesigned, as well as a brand new embedded style oil pan gasket. Apparently this has really helped, although I have heard that these oil pans are still leaking, but nowhere near as common as the first gen EcoBoost engines. Now, there is also a technical service bulletin for the first gen EcoBoost oil pan gaskets, but I did want to show you this. So this is coming out of a big 15 liter diesel engine, and guess what? These things also run plastic oil pans, but the gasket they use is much like the second gen. See how it's embedded into the plastic, much less susceptible to all those heat cycles expanding and contracting. Another known issue for these engines is leaking cylinder head valve guides. This was particularly an issue for the 2016 to 2017 trucks with the first gen EcoBoost engine. What would happen is oil would pass by those valve guides and get into the combustion chamber, resulting in this engine burning oil. Now, this is not a catastrophic issue, but it should be dealt with to avoid further issues with other components. If you guys are noticing blue smoke coming out of the tailpipe, or you're losing oil without any visible oil leaks, this could very likely be the issue. The good news is that Ford released a technical service bulletin, which I'll link down in the description. If you have a truck between 2016 and 2017 and you're burning more than 1 quart of oil per 3,000 miles, they should fix this issue for free. which is really nice because this is a very costly repair. I believe the labor time on this is 24 hours. And well, the parts list on this is pretty substantial as well. Another common issue with these engines is timing chain rattle. This occurs when the timing chain tensioner gets a little bit loose and therefore the timing chain gets a little sloppy and you start to hear that rattle. Once again, this issue is contained to the first gen trucks, 2015 to 2017. The 2018 plus trucks with the second gen EcoBoost engine do not suffer from this problem. As of 2018, Ford went with a dual timing chain setup, which is just a stronger setup in general. The first gen 2.7 EcoBoost utilized a single timing chain. For those of you who do have a first gen 2.7 liter EcoBoost, this issue starts to kind of reveal itself around 80,000, 100,000 miles. And if you do once again start to hear that timing chain rattle, it is probably time to change your timing chain tensioner. And I would highly recommend to do so. It's not a small job and usually it falls out of warranty, but having a timing chain failure can result in a catastrophic engine failure, unfortunately. So again, I would highly recommend to get that done if you guys hear this timing chain rattle. The last common issue that caught my eye is carbon buildup due to direct injection on these engines. I've talked about this a number of times with different engines, and once again, this is not a Ford issue. This is just a direct injection fueling issue. It happens across every engine utilizing direct injection. Basically what happens is the intake and the intake valve start to get a little bit of carbon buildup as the years go by, and then eventually can actually cause some restriction of airflow into the engine, resulting in some performance problems. Once again, this only affects the first gen 2.7 liter EcoBoost engines, and this really shouldn't cause anyone to panic. Usually around 100,000 miles, you'll probably start to see some carbon buildup of significance on your intake or your intake valve. However, if this was my personal engine, if I own one of these engines, I really wouldn't worry about it until I saw or felt any performance issues. However, if you do have a higher mileage engine and you are starting to notice maybe some rough idling, maybe a lack of power, I would probably want to take a look at potential carbon buildup on your intake. And unfortunately, as more life gets put on the engine, that carbon buildup is only just going to increase and increase. So it does need to be dealt with if you guys are experiencing performance issues, because eventually what can happen is you can have complete misfires just because of the lack of airflow getting into your engine. Additionally, the type of oil you use in your engine can potentially help with carbon buildup. One source of carbon buildup comes from oil vapors going through your PCV back through your intake and getting reburned through your engine. NOAC volatility is the measure of how volatile your oil is. An oil with lower NOAC volatility is going to be much better in terms of trying to prevent carbon buildup on your intake. Second gen owners 2018 plus have nothing to worry about because Ford being Ford, well, they implemented what's called a dual fuel injection system. This engine utilizes direct injection just like the first gen. However, this engine also utilizes port injection, aka a dual injection system. And that constant spray of the port injection fuel cleans off the intake and the intake valve, so no carbon deposits will be there. So those are the top 5 common issues that caught my eye. Let me know what you think. Do you think I missed something? I do want to touch on the fact that, as with most engines, the first gen engine tends to have the most problems. Just looking at Ford, this is the case for the 5 liter, the 3.5 liter EcoBoost, even the 6.7 liter Power Stroke. Its first generation was plagued with significantly more problems than later generations. Just keep that in mind when you're looking at the newest, brightest, shiniest engine that a manufacturer has released. Odds are the first couple years are going to have a ton more problems than the later years when those are all nice and ironed out. Now, touching on some things that would concern me about this engine. The first one is oil dilution. So this is a direct injection engine as well as a forced induction or a twin turbocharged engine, and the chances of fuel dilution in this oil are much greater than a naturally aspirated port injection engine. Now this goes for both the first gen and the second gen. These engines tend to run a little bit rich until they're up to temperature. So if you are in colder climates, the chance of fuel dilution in your oil are even greater. Now, oil dilution is not catastrophic. but what it does do, it can hinder the performance of your oil, especially to components like your main bearings or turbo shaft bearings in this engine. Those components are spinning incredibly quick and they need good oil in order to not get damage on them. And I say this about every engine, you want to change your oil in a timely manner, but I'm not joking about these EcoBoost engines. You truly do not want to run these engines probably more than like 5,000 miles, and you'll want to run synthetic oil, the best oil you can find, because once you start getting over that, the amount of fuel dilution in your oil is just going to increase. And as we just mentioned, we have twin turbos, so those turbo shafts are spinning at like almost 80,000 RPM, extremely fast. And if there is too much oil dilution with fuel, the oil is just not going to be able to do its job, and it's going to result in damage. Now, the last thing I don't like to close this video off is that in 2018, with the second gen engines, Ford went with a variable displacement belt driven oil pump. I just don't like that. The reason why Ford is doing that, along with a lot of other manufacturers, is because first of all, it can help extend your oil life intervals, as well as potentially saving you some fuel economy. I generally just think it's a weak point on this engine, and it's just another thing to potentially go wrong, something that you really don't want to go wrong. So you guys already saw the oil pan down from the engine, well, still in the truck here. This is actually the oil pump here. See how it's gear driven? Gear on gear, just as strong as she gets, because this is such a critical component for not only this big engine, but any engine in general. If this oil pump stops pumping oil, it's only a matter of like seconds, if not minutes, before your engine is cooked. Let's get up under this beast here. All right, so like I said, it's a big engine. So your crankshaft here, and this is back here, that massive gear right there, that's what drives your oil pump. So again, these engines, just extremely strong setup. The Fords are gonna use a belt-driven system, so yeah, just want to show you guys that. Now, at the end of the day, there have been no major issues reported about this oil pump or the oil pump belt. And it's been out for, I guess, almost 6 years at this point. So you would think we'd hear issues if there were going to be issues. Ford rates this belt at 150,000 miles, but it has been reported some people have driven on them for like 200,000 miles. So until we start hearing real common issues with this oil pump, I don't think we should be too concerned, but it is something I thought I should bring up. Overall, guys, I do think this 2.7 liter EcoBoost engine is a very well-built engine, and I would be happy to own one if I was in the market for a 1500. I do think this is kind of the future, as much as people may hate me saying that, especially with the emissions seemingly tightening up every single year. I think we're just gonna start seeing more turbocharged engines, smaller displacement turbocharged engines, but those are my thoughts on the issues and some potential things that I don't like about this engine. If you guys like the video, don't forget to leave that thumbs up. And if you like cool stuff like this, don't forget to subscribe. We got lots of cool stuff planned for 2024. But enough of me. I'll see you in the next freaking video.